What is going on, everybody? It's your boy John, and welcome back to Gearbox. So today, I know I've done a lot of videos lately regarding air suspension. Obviously, this has been a pretty big mod that I've done to this car, both from a price perspective, but also just overall looks or changes of the car, and really all in all, I love it. I think air suspension is a great option when it comes to changing up the suspension setup of your car, lowering the ride height, etc., etc. But really the video today is going to really be nailing down drawbacks of running air suspension. As much as I would like to sit here and say air suspension is the greatest thing ever and you're going to have no issues, or it's kind of a set it and forget it type of deal, that's just not going to be the case. So what I want to do is kind of roll through a couple key things, key reasons why specifically Airlift 3P, and a lot of these will apply to other air suspension setups, but specifically 3P because that's what I'm running. Maybe some things to look out for, or just reasons why you might not be inclined to purchase air suspension. To be totally honest, had I known about some of these things, I don't know. And some of that can be resolved through the 3H system and et cetera, but that's enough of me rambling. Also, Who Day, go Bengals. It's the first Sunday of the regular season. Hopefully we can get back to a Super Bowl. Who knows? Probably not, but whatever. Anyway, let's get into point number one, and we will go from there. All right, everyone, so point number one to this video, as far as maybe some drawbacks or negatives around the air suspension setups. Obviously, there are a lot of them out there. But first and foremost, and it's going to be the first thing you got to do with it in general, is install. It's not just a set of coilovers. It's not just a set of lowering springs. There is a lot that goes into the installation of air suspension. Basically, your coilover setup is going to be 1/5 of what you have going on. After you get the struts installed, you got to run air lines. You have to run the wiring harness. You have to, kind of to the wiring harness, do some add-a-fuse type stuff. You have to wire everything correctly. You have to make sure your air lines are put in places where they're not going to get nicked by rocks or any type of road stuff, and they're not going to pull out of, when you turn the wheel, airline's not going to pull out when you go full lock left, full lock right. Teflon tape, the whole 9 yards. It is unbelievably complex. And then obviously you have your trunk set up. You need to mount your air tank. You need to get your compressors. You need to get the airlift, in my case, the Airlift 3P module kind of set in there, get the lines run to it, hide the wires. There is a whole bunch of shit that it takes to install your Airlift air suspension setup. And in my case, I went ahead and said, fuck it, I'm paying someone to install it because I don't have the time or, really the tools to do it effectively. So I went ahead and dropped $2,000 on the install of my Airlift 3P setup, and honestly it was probably the best thing I could have done because I would have been beating myself up trying to do this shit. But if you're the type of person to say, I'm going to do it, I want to do it beginning to end, beware. Just don't put yourself in a position where you bit off more than you can chew. So that's definitely number one for sure. It's a lot. There's no way around it, but if you got a couple buddies who know what they're doing, maybe it's something you could have a couple beers, put it in over a weekend, and be done with it. But that is point number one. On to dos. Okay, point number two to this video as far as downsides or negatives to running air suspension over maybe some other suspension setups is obviously going to be price. That's just a given. I kind of hesitated even putting this in the video, but it is something to consider. Now that's not to say you can't get some super expensive coilovers or something like that But for kind of an entry level suspension mod, if you will, you're going to be paying probably four times the price for a good new air suspension setup. You're going to be looking at probably, I don't know, $3,000 in struts. You're going to be looking at probably $1,000 in the air tank and compressors, and then obviously you're going to be paying for the management. That's really where, you know, that money lies, is the brains behind everything. Now, once again, I'm running Airlift 3P, so I am a pressure-based system. It is one of the most advanced. It's essentially the second most advanced airlift, specifically airlift setup. I will be upgrading it to 3H soon. I just don't know when. But either way, it's unbelievably expensive. Now, I lucked out because I was able to get this set up, if you have watched previous videos, struts, tank, 3P, compressor, basically everything other than the lines and the fittings for $1,800. Okay, huge steal, and I would have been a fucking moron to pass it up. So I'm kind of an outlier there, but if you're getting brand new stuff, you know, you're looking at $4,000, $5,000 before you even have the bits and pieces to get it installed. So price is absolutely a barrier to entry. For a similar, you know, if you're going with like a Fortune Auto coilover or, you know, something like that, you know, initially you're probably starting out going to be around the $1,200, $1,500 range, which is obviously a lot more palatable to most people than $4,000 to $5,000. So that's pretty self-explanatory, but I did want to throw it in there. You are going to be paying a pretty penny for it, and obviously there's a lot of technology behind it, so that's why. So yeah, easy. Point number 2. So now we'll go ahead and giddy on up to point number 3. All right, hopefully from this camera angle you can see how nice and shiny my car is. Kind of throwback to last week's video on detailing. Went ahead and washed this puppy up this morning, looking beautiful. But anyway, point number 3 here is going to be maintenance. And I know I did kind of a video specific to maintenance, but this system, any air suspension system, is going to require a lot more maintenance than, once again, your average coilover setup. Now that's not to say coilovers don't require maintenance, they absolutely do. Technically everything on your car in some way, shape, or form is going to require maintenance. It's just that this is a lot more complex, and there's more maintenance required. That's really it. You're not just looking at the strut maintenance, which we've talked about time and time again. You're looking at airline maintenance, or at least a thorough look over to make sure that everything's good. You're looking at your water trap that you have, you know, connected to your tank to make sure you're not pumping water into your struts. You're just making sure that everything is good to go, because realistically, if something fails on your air suspension setup, you will be stranded. And that is a big downside to this setup, and part of the reason why I always kind of pucker up a little bit when I go to drive this car on a road trip or something. It's something I really have to keep in mind, where if an airline blows out or the fittings are loose and I'm losing pressure in a bag, or you know, God forbid you get to like a catastrophic failure of pumping water into your strut, you're gonna have a bad day. So that's really something you need to do routine maintenance on. It's just like anything else in the car world, but definitely a lot more maintenance than your lower end springs or coilovers for sure. So that's number 3. All right, everyone. So the 4th thing I want to talk about as it relates to kind of a downside of air suspension in general is going to be weight. I don't know that a lot of people really understand how heavy and how much shit goes into running air suspension, but I can pretty much guarantee you airbags, like the actual struts and everything, are going to be heavier than coilovers alone, let alone the fact that you also need an air tank, compressors, the management, the airlines, everything. It is not light. And truth be told, probably 95% of us don't give a shit. I know I don't. Or at least not that much, right? All of us want to drive these super cool, fast cars, whatever, and that's fine. But it's not like I'm ripping my car around the Nürburgring. That's just not what I do. Would I love to? Yes. But, long story short, to a lot of us, the weight savings or lack thereof is not going to matter. It's more so something to consider for people who maybe are thinking about running air suspension for kind of a daily driver, but also track monster type setup or something along those lines. It's definitely possible, but it's something to keep in mind because it is not a light setup by a long shot. So anyway, definitely I think out of all the points, if there's something that most people don't really think about, it's probably this one. And it's very important given what application you're trying to use your air suspension for. So anyway, that's number 4. On to the 5th and final point. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, for the 5th and final point of today's video as to some drawbacks or negatives, some things to consider around running an air suspension setup, kind of piggybacking off of point number 3, but is going to be the complexity of troubleshooting, or just the complexity in general. We've made a couple videos troubleshooting the car. One has been my nemesis, the front right strut, that has been banging and creaking and whatever. We finally figured that out. It was a loose lock collar, which is problematic. I actually just found a fitting in this bag that was loose, and so the PSI on my controller was slowly but surely dropping. That was a loose fitting. We found a leak in the tank setup coupled with the bleeder valve of the tank. So just these little things that, once again, maintenance is going to help mitigate those. But if you do experience them, you're going to have some sort of thought process or strategy on how you're going to fix it. For example, when I realized the tank was leaking, or when kind of how I pinpointed that issue was on my controller as I'm driving, the bags, the 4 corners of the car were staying the same PSI. Great. But over time, I knew that the tank PSI in the top right corner was slowly dropping. That's going to show it's a tank issue. For the front right strut, tank was fine. 152, 153 PSI. Front left, and rear right bags were holding pressure. Front right, over time, slowly dropping. So just little things you're going to have to do and be able to critically think about to make sure that, your car is operating to its full potential. I know I've said that a lot of times, and you're probably like, John, shut the fuck up. That's totally fine as well. A lot of people tell me to shut the fuck up. But anyway, it adds another level of maintenance, of complexity, of things you got to think about as opposed to coilovers. It's just true. But it's a give and take, right? You want to be able to slam your nuts on the ground when you go park at a car show. There's some pros and cons there. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if there's anything else you suggest, any questions you have on that, drop them in the comments below. I love seeing y'all kind of go back and forth with me or with everyone else. That's always good to see. As always, once again, give this video a thumbs up, hit subscribe, notification bell. You know the drill. Until next time, peace.